Hi guys, Totallydubbed here, and today I'm doing a video review on the Acoustic 330i, which you can see behind me. I know, exhibit. These speakers, these bookshelf speakers, are going to be found for around £330 in the UK. If you live in the UK or indeed elsewhere, the locally link in the description below will take you to your localized Amazon store. So without further ado, let's get into it. Now first off, I want to talk about its design. Now the speakers themselves are pretty large. In terms of how large exactly? Well, in terms of height, 325 millimeters. In terms of its width, 200 millimeters. And in terms of its depth, 329 millimeters. So unlike me, where I've got a relatively small desk, you will want to try and ensure that the speakers fit well in your setup. In my case, I've got them pretty close to the wall, and thankfully Acoustic provides a little foam bit which you can plug in terms of the bass port in order to reduce the boominess of the bass, and I'll get into that in the sound quality section. But in terms of sizing, it's just worth bearing that in mind. Furthermore, in terms of the actual colors, they come in 4 different colors. You can see the ones behind me are the greyish black color. They come in terms of a wooden and a white finish as well, which look pretty nice depending on your setup. Now elsewhere, I would like to point out that the speakers do have a quite reflective design, and specifically at the front. Now you'll be able to see here me waving at the camera. You can see that the speakers are very much reflective. Now it's worth bearing that in mind simply because if you do live or have them in a somewhat sunlit room, then you will see a lot of reflection, and that can somewhat throw you off. Now in terms of connectivity, these are passive bookshelf speakers, so around the back you will find a set of speaker plugs that you can plug in your cables. In my case, I use QED cables throughout my entire system, and funnily enough, those are recommended by Acoustic by complete coincidence. Now build quality aside and design, let's talk about sound quality. Of course, the most important part of this review. Now you will like to know that the mid/bass driver of these Acoustic speakers is 165 millimeters in terms of size, and its tweeter, which is a decoupled tweeter by Acoustic, is 22 millimeters in size. Now what does this all mean? Well, quite frankly, you'd want to know in terms of its frequency response, and here the speakers will cut off at 46 Hz and go up to 30 kilohertz, which is way past more than you will ever probably need. In this case, what I will suggest is that if you do have the appropriate setup and you do want that low-end rumble, I would suggest hooking it up with a subwoofer. In this case, Acoustic actually sent me the B12 subwoofer, the absolute beef of a subwoofer, and I must say it's a stunning subwoofer on its own as a standalone, let alone in relation to the speakers or into the amplifier. But in this case, the subwoofer really does deliver that low-end rumble. So all I'm trying to say over here in relation to the 330i review is that if you do want that low-end rumble, you will want a subwoofer to be connected, be it the Acoustic B12 or any other subwoofer that you might have lying around. Now before we get into the actual raw sound quality of the speakers, I do want to mention in terms of driving it. Now I did a test for you guys and also for myself in terms of comparing the Denon AVR X500 receiver and the pretty expensive Cambridge Audio CXA61, which you can see just behind me hopefully. It's a stereo amplifier. Now the difference between the two amplifiers was pretty much night and day. What I found is the Cambridge Audio was not only able to deliver better mid-range, but I did find the Acoustic speakers, in comparison to my Creative EMU XM7s, to need a little bit more power. In this case, the Cambridge Audio receiver does provide that, whilst my Denon AVR X500 seemed to be a little bit lackluster. So with my talking out the way, here's a little bit of an A/B test.
The only way I know how to play this game to success, I'm not quite sussed it yet. When I reach the brink, my way back to falling from so high, falling from so high, so high.
So hopefully you were able to hear the differences. It's not an ideal scenario. Of course, your own ears and being present in front of the speakers will be very much better than listening to a compressed audio file over YouTube and via my audio recordings. But it should give you somewhat of an idea to see what the differences are between a okay receiver and a pretty impressive receiver, and how this kind of affects the 330i's overall sound. And so now we're going to talk about the actual performance of the 330i's. Now before getting into the analysis, what I'm going to do is give you literally an A/B test using my Creative EMU XM7s and comparing them to the 330i's.
You should have and learn how to fly. It's the only way I know how to play this game to success. I'm not quite sussed it yet. When I reach the brink, I am crawling my way back to falling from so high, falling from so high. The thing is my imagination.
So hopefully that comparison gave you an idea of literally two speakers running the same amplifier, pretty much the same cables and the same source, in other words my PC, and playing the same sort of music. Shout out to Priya, by the way, my friend. If you do like her music, do give her a like and subscribe. She'll be linked down below. Now in terms of the sound frequency and how this performs, first off, the sub bass. Well, you might expect 40 Hz, 46 Hz cutoff means there's very little sub bass, if any. As mentioned before, you will want a subwoofer to extend that low-end tones. So I would, again, suggest to get a subwoofer, be it the Acoustic B12 or another subwoofer of your choosing, or one that you have lying around. Moving on from that, we've got the mid-bass. Now, straight off, when I got the speakers out the box, what I found interesting was that little foam bit. As I mentioned before, that foam bit is actually due to reducing the boominess of the speakers, namely in setups like mine, where you've got it too close to your wall. So Acoustic even suggested through the manual to actually put that foam bit in if you do notice a bit of boominess. And in my case, specifically in the type of music I listen to, which is R&B, dance music, EDM, then I did find that the 330i's in my setup sounded a little bit too boomy. Put that foam bit in, give it plenty of burn in, and suddenly that mid bass sounds controlled, tight and punchy and absolutely fantastic to listen to. What I'm trying to say over here is that the mid bass response was somewhat of one of its best traits, and I was so surprised at how well the Acoustics did throughout the mid bass frequency range. Then moving on from there, we've got the mid range. Now the mid range is a little bit recessed. It's not quite that purest dream. In other words, it is recessed and a little bit pushed down. Now, again, in comparison to the Creative Emu 7, it will sound far more forward sounding. But for those who want less of a kind of warmer sounding speaker, you might want to look elsewhere. Don't get me wrong, again, the Acoustic 330i's did an incredible job with my music, but I can imagine those people who listen to, let's say, purely classical music will want something to be a little bit more tailored to the mid-range rather than the mid-bass tones. And in this case, the Acoustic 330i's might not be their pick. In my case, however, absolutely phenomenal. Absolutely love it. And personally, I do prefer somewhat a slightly V-shaped sound. Not extreme, but a little bit of a V-shaped sound because I prefer that slightly warmer sound signature. This is all subjective, of course, and depends on terms of the music you listen to. And finally, we get onto the highs, which I found to be absolutely perfect. I had no issues whatsoever. And by the way, shout out to the birds outside. Now, because it pretty much links in with the highs, right? There you go, you can hear it. But in terms of the highs, what I really loved is that it was really well extended. And of course, that 30 kilohertz range, that extension, is pretty much not going to be heard by most people, if by anyone other than a sort of a robot. But what I'm trying to say over here is that for me it sounded very, very good and really beautiful, and I can understand that some people might find it to be a little bit harsh on the ears, but in my case, I just found it to be perfect. I found it to be that right balance between extending well enough, but then not sounding too like harsh or sounding too kind of rolled off. Hopefully that makes sense. If you got any questions, of course, do ask me down in the comments below. Now, in terms of the soundstage, the Acoustic 330i's delivered a fantastic width and depth. Now, they might not sound as airy as the Edifier S3000 Pro, for example, but that width and depth over, let's say, the KEF LS50 or LSX50 wireless is somewhat like a night and day comparison. I got a lot of hate on my KEF video for telling that they had a sort of closed-ish soundstage, given the setup I have, and then I put the 330i's on, and suddenly all that problem goes away. It just shows that these speakers are fantastic in their soundstage department. So on the whole, what do I make of the sound quality? Well, truthfully, if it isn't quite apparent already, I absolutely love the sound quality of the 330i's. They are a little bit recessed, a little bit warm sounding, but on the whole, they're excellent. And given that their price tag they come in at around £330, again, bear in mind, they're passive bookshelf speakers, not active speakers. they're again incredible. They're among the best passive bookshelf speakers I've actually heard in terms of overall sound frequencies and in terms of what they actually deliver at their price. It's somewhat of a no-brainer. That's pretty much my verdict. That's my honest, unbiased, unpaid opinion. Shout out to Acoustic for actually lending me these to actually hear them. I really do appreciate it. It's awesome that I can actually listen to different audio equipment, and that is all made possible from you guys for subscribing and liking my videos over the years. So again, truly appreciated that. And of course, if you do want to continue doing that, hit that like button, as they might say. If you're still here, yes, the shirt is pretty awesome. I'll link that down in the description below in case you're interested. It's from QWERTY. I bought it. Yeah, Star Wars mixed with Queen. What more could you want? Alright guys, bye-bye.